Hi, I'm Andy Ramirez for the Liberty News Network. On November 10, 2010, El Paso, Texas was the site of the 6th Conference of Sovereign Challenge. Now, this setting, according to the website, and I quote, El Paso was chosen due to its incredible and relevant current issues of border security, illegal drug trafficking, and migration. Now, some of the individuals involved in this conference included Alan Burson, the Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Also listed on their list was Admiral Eric Olson, who is the Commander of U.S. Special Operations. Admiral Winfield, who is the Commander for U.S. Northern Command and NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Council. Also there in attendance was John Cook, the Mayor of El Paso, who I must note is a amnesty or open border supporter. Stanislav Kajio, who is the Interior Minister for Bosnia-Herzegovina. Gustavo Mojar, who is the Director General of Migration for Mexico. Wonder what his role is in this conference. Jose Luis Valdez Ugalde, the Director for the Center of Research on North America. Can't make this up, my friends. And of course, other figures including Stan Schrager from the U.S. Special Operations Command. Now, their website goes on to thank NORTHCOM, U.S. Northern Command, for co-sponsoring this event. Here are some of Mr. Burson's comments from the recent conference. He states, and I quote, "The violence, as he categorized it, he calls this a core focus and concern." You think? Mexico's Calderon administration has taken a courageous and historic stand against the criminal groups there. They have had notable success in taking down leaders of drug traffickers, organizations, and their key lieutenants. Now, it's kind of debatable there, considering you have certain lieutenants and certain leaders being taken down in certain areas. Look at Juarez, for example, it's constantly in the news, but you're not hearing much about some other areas and some of the other cartel activities. So it's kind of making you wonder, should make you think. Go back to Vicente Fox. You didn't hear about Juarez, you heard about Nuevo Laredo. But I'll come back to this. He continues, Mr. Burson that is. He hailed Mexico's efforts to purge its border management agencies of corruption and vetting of new employees while establishing a strong law enforcement presence in the borderlands. Now that too is also debatable. Of course, how many Mexican incursions have we had over the years by their military, who they claim were lost? The U.S., said Burson, is providing support for those efforts, including monitoring what is going into the country, while Mexico continues to criticize our nation's efforts and our citizens and leaders' comments when it comes to criticizing our administration for their lack of security, for their lack of controlling the ports of entry and between the ports of entry. Mr. Burson continued, "We're coordinating inspections and law enforcement efforts, coordinating and capacity building, and providing assistance to Mexico. We are improving our information sharing regimes, including sharing information about potentially dangerous individuals and cargo traveling into Mexico by land, air, and sea." Are you kidding me, Alan? Now, I've been told by sources you're a man of integrity. But if you're buying into this and these are the statements that are coming out of you, I mean, let's keep in mind, Mexico is a corrupt nation. You know, I don't know how many times I've said this over the years, but again, I got to go back to a case, the House of Death, where the ICE informant states on record, and I quote, that the Mexican government is the cartel. So when you're sharing information with the leaders and government of Mexico, you're sharing information with their cartels because that is how well they have infiltrated the government. You know, it just really makes you wonder what is going on over there, and have our people that are responsible for agencies forgotten who they're supposed to represent? But Burson continues, He outlined his, and I quote, holistic type of framework to border security, calling it corridor security. Now, we know the corridors exist because that's exactly how it's always been. There are certain corridors that are a little more active at certain times. There are certain corridors that are a lot more active at times. And then there are others that are ignored where you occasionally get some traffic from our side, meaning law enforcement, because they're hitting the noted areas. You know, but I'll save that for another report. Continuing. Illicit goods and people generally travel to the United States in distinct corridors, geographic routes that begin abroad, cross the border, and enter into the interior United States. In the case of the drug trade in Mexico, there is a reverse flow of illicit proceeds and firearms from the interior United States across the border and into Mexico. And it's the same with Canada as well, across our northern border. But what about interior enforcement? That's not even discussed. You know, Livermore sector, which was the #1 sector in the Central Valley of California, when DHS became DHS and reorganized everybody, that was one of the, in fact, that was the sector, Border Patrol sector, that was #1 in apprehensions and was eliminated when the Border Patrol was restricted to the borders for the most part, and ICE was given the interior enforcement responsibility. For my money, the Border Patrol was a hell of a lot more effective. They got the job done. Continuing though. Securing the corridors means attacking the whole of the criminal continuum at its source points in the transit zones at the border and in the interior and distribution areas in a systematic and coordinated fashion, as opposed to compartmentalizing the corridor and pursuing individual enforcement efforts in vacuum. Excuse me, Mr. Burson, but have you read the National Border Patrol Strategy, sir? I think it's pretty clear that David Aguilar's strategy, since he became the chief of the Border Patrol, and since CBP and ICE signed their Memorandum of Understanding back in November 2004, has been pretty simple. There is no interior enforcement. And the Border Patrol strategy, though it's said on paper to be controlling the borders at and between the ports of entry, that's a joke. Everybody knows it's a joke. The only thing that's being controlled is the agents. We certainly aren't controlling the traffic at and between the ports of entry. You know, you may have numbers out there, but the numbers don't mean anything when they're skewered, as I've heard from a number of agents, active duty and retired, and also when we know that the job's just not being done. If the job was being done, believe me, we'd have heard about it. Now, you also got to look at this from another aspect. You know, compartmentalizing the corridor. Now, that's a militaristic term which sounds impressive when you're listening to a DOD briefing, because that's a kind of thing that's been utilized for some time. But when you're hearing it coming out of the Border Patrol, it's almost a joke. The only thing that's compartmentalized is the agency, so that the truth can't get out, because agents who do tell the truth get in trouble. They're either fired on trumped-up charges, or they're prosecuted on questionable charges, overreaching charges. Of course, we all know that that's another story, well documented. Now, coordinating Mexico, though, that in itself, I mean, are you kidding me? The only thing that the CBP has proven they can coordinate with Mexico is how to enter the United States, because that's how we've been utilizing CBP to train their people in southern Mexico to prevent illegal entry into Mexico. We've also been very good at sharing information so they know when congressional delegations are down at the border, so that they know when civilian activities such as border watches are taking place along the border, and when things are taking place in the interior, such as coordinated efforts between groups that support law enforcement, including the Border Patrol, visits to Capitol Hill, rallies, and what have you. So we know CBP has done their job when it comes to coordinating Mexico, but not for the same reasons that Mr. Burson would have you believe. Again, it just makes you wonder, is he still the same man of integrity I've heard, or has he drank the Kool-Aid and bought into the philosophy? So we've all been there, we've all heard that before. We've heard the empty lies and the promises and things that are just not going to be done. We've heard the borders are more secure than they ever been. But here's the thing, it's not being done, and we're not being fooled this time around. Border Patrol needs to be able to do their jobs because we know the agents sure want to, and let them get out there, let them enforce. At and between the ports of entry, of course, at the ports of entry in a secondary role because those customs officers know what they're doing. We need to let them all do their jobs. Get ICE off the border and let them do what they were created to do. Get into the interior enforcement, because otherwise we don't need ICE, and we might as well just eliminate that agency and overhaul CBP and let everybody get back to what they were doing prior to the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. But it's up to us to follow up on this and to see what happens, because Congress, this new Congress that will be seated in January 2011, they got a message loud and clear, and America's tired of nothing being done. They're tired of amnesties, and they're tired of all these nonsensical hearings that have been held over the past 4 years. What we want to see is something done to secure America, and not secure it from ourselves, but secure it from our enemies who are infiltrating at and between the ports of entry. We want Congress to do their job, and that's hold the executive branch and the judicial branch accountable. That's the whole point of checks and balances. Not for everybody to be in cahoots, but for the branch of government, the people's branch, the legislative branch, to keep an eye on this and cut the nonsense. We also need you, our fellow Americans, to make sure to stay on top of these issues, to read about them, and to learn more. For the Liberty News Network, I'm Andy Ramirez.